Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's lecture. We will get started momentarily after we give another minute or so for people to log on. We thank you very much for joining us.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the last seminar of the critical issue for contemporary Chinese studies, for contemporary China, sorry. Today, we're very fortunate to have Professor Cheng Li from Brookings Institution to talk to us about leadership lineup for the 20th Party Congress, which is a topic that is of interest for everyone, I can say. And we are equally honored to have Professor Liz Perry to chair and moderate this session. Liz doesn't need introduction. And so over to you, Liz.
Thank you very much, Winnie. It's a real pleasure and a real privilege to help to host this session today for my colleague and friend, Cheng Li, fellow political scientist of China. Cheng, as many of you know, was raised in Shanghai, but came to this country in the mid-1980s, studied Asian studies at the University of California at Berkeley, and then went on to Princeton to earn his PhD in politics. He is, in my view, this country's premier Pekinologist and has written a number of extremely informative and often very prescient works about Chinese elite politics. But he's not simply a specialist on elite politics. He's also written some wonderful monographs and articles on ordinary Chinese society. When Cheng returned to China after a number of years in the United States, he wrote a terrific book called Rediscovering China, a very heartwarming book filled with extremely informative anecdotes about his interactions with Chinese in all different walks of life. And then most recently, in this past year, he's written another terrific book about Chinese society entitled Middle Class Shanghai, which is filled not only with fascinating political information about the city of Shanghai and its relationship to elite politics, but also fascinating information about higher education in Shanghai, and perhaps most notable, a great deal of information about avant-garde in contemporary Shanghai. So I also recommend to you Cheng's latest big book, which is intended as a means of improving Sino-American communication by talking about ways in which middle-class people in China's most cosmopolitan city share a lot in common with people in this country. Today, as Professor Yip mentioned, Dr. Li is going to talk to us about personnel changes that he anticipates at the upcoming 20th Party Congress next year. Before I turn it over to Cheng, let me also note that the audience is welcome at any time to submit questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We probably won't have a chance to get to all of the questions, but I will attempt to get to as many as possible. And so feel free at any point when Dr. Li is speaking to submit your questions. And I may not pose them in precisely the way in which you wrote them down, but I'll do my best to be faithful to the spirit of the questions. So without any further hesitation, let me turn this over to Cheng Li to talk to us about the upcoming 20th Party Congress.
Thanks, Liz, for your very generous introduction. And also thanks for Winnie for your kind invitation. First, I would like to applaud the Fairbank Center for Chinese Studies and Harvard University Asian Center for your long-standing renowned efforts to promote interdisciplinary area studies and to advance international understanding. For the series on critical issues confronting China, you are also providing a great service for both the scholarly and the public policy communities with your distinct emphasis on comprehensive analysis of China's domestic development and the challenges. I'm humbled and honored to have a conversation with you, Liz, a fellow Shanghainese whose scholarship has long been an inspiration for me. I truly look forward to answering questions from you and your distinguished audience. In the next 30 to 40 minutes, I will share with you my analysis and forecast of the personnel changes at the 20th Party Congress, which will be held next fall. So this is the topic. I will cover three issues. One is, as Liz said, the Pekinology and its capacity and its challenges in the new environment. Then I will talk about the focus on Xi Jinping and talk about his campaigns over the past 9 years and also the changes under his leadership. Then thirdly, I will talk about the rising stars, especially after the 20th Party Congress. We already can see some of the candidates and their clusters and their characteristics. So I use 6 C words to organize my presentation. Now, first, we should, I wanted to explain, I think most of you probably will agree with me, the nature of the Chinese political system. It's the Leninist party state, which means that the party monopolizes the power. That's not a secret. This is actually endorsed by the both party constitution and the PRC constitution. And the party control over the army, personnel, media, legal system, and even youth. So this is certainly reflect the Chinese political system, authoritarian nature of that system. So elite politics, as often being said, is the only game in town. And also Xi Jinping himself actually recently said, the key to the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation lies in the party. And he talked about the importance of a small number of key officials in his term. This is called Chinese, it's 关键少数. It's extremely important from his perspective. Now, let me very quickly mention about the Chinese political, Chinese organizational, chart of the party. Every 5 years, they will have a National Party Congress. In that Congress, they will designate 2 committees, or 1 committee, 1 commission. The most important one is Central Committee. The other one is dealing with the corruption and discipline. And the Central Committee will choose directly General Secretary, Politburo Standing Committee, and the Politburo. And the Politburo Standing Committee and Politburo will choose Secretary. Now, also the Central Committee will also select the Central Military Commission. Now, for the last Party Congress, which was held, in 2017, you see this is a look at the composition. China, at that time, 4 years ago, it's 89 million of Communist Party members. Now, actually, Chinese just in June, later June, they announced a new number. It's 95 million. Most of the new recruits are college students and young people. Now, also, the Party Congress has the delegates, which only met once in these 5 years. And they also announced in the upcoming Party Congress, they will select 2,300, 20 more than the last Party Congress in terms of delegates. Then delegates will, in Chinese term, elect or vote. But some of the top leaders, of course, it's already designated by Beidaihe meeting or other meetings by the departing Politburo Standing Committee. They will select the Central Committee members, including 204 full members and 172. That was the last party Congress, altogether 376 members. These are very, very important political leaders. They are governors, provincial party secretaries, ministers, executive vice minister, military leaders, top elites of the top companies, and etc. Then 25 of the Politburo members will be from that Central Committee. The most important leadership body, of course, is 7 member of Politburo Standing Committee. Then General Secretary Xi Jinping. So that's the background. Now we know there's a lot of discussion in China and outside China. The perception of the Chinese leadership, especially those commonly held in the West, such as being rigid, opaque, stagnant, ineffective, unpopular, and the winners take all. All have some truths, but it is also important for students of China to recognize that some or even all of this conventional wisdom should be subject to more critical, more balanced, and more objective analysis. Otherwise, we really cannot interpret some of the phenomenon in China. Now, for example, my research on the subject shows that the Chinese elite politics has not been as opaque as many have assumed. Now, this is the page actually was posted 2 weeks before the last party Congress. I made a prediction about the 12 candidates for the Politburo Standing Committee. This is 2 weeks before. So after they announced, then I added this check. So all these 9 on my list. So not too bad. And others are also in the Politburo. Now, but actually 1 year ago, I gave a talk at the UBC, British Columbia, University of British Columbia, and also later at Yale and some other universities. I predict that these are the rising stars that will occupy the seats in Politburo Standing Committee and Politburo, Xi Jinping's protege. And so particularly, of course, all of them are very, very powerful now. Particularly, at that time, we did not know will be 5 members of Politburo Standing Committee or 7 or 9. And but I said if it's 5, will be the top 5, this top from 1 to 5. If 7, will be the top 7 in this list. If 9, will be these 9 people. But of course, later on, we do know that the top 9 people, which replaced the previous one, is exactly the top 7 I predicted a year earlier in October 2016. Now, actually, these early 2 photos were sent by my friend, Professor Yves Tegelman. I do not know how to pronounce his French name. He has a beautiful Chinese name, Xiao Yifu. I believe that he probably is also watching, he told me about this webinar. So, which means that the leadership, despite some degree of opaque nature, we still can predict, we still can analyze. It's not by the internal sources or whatever, like someone, but based on their trajectory and etc. Now, even the 18th Party Congress, I wrote an article, predicted these 7 people, actually got most of them, 6 of them are correct. The 1 person I got mistake is Li Yuancao. I predicted he will be in the Politburo Standing Committee, but actually he ended up only in the Politburo. The person replacing him is Yu Zhenshen from Shanghai. So, so these are the things I just want to make a point. Not so much that how good I was, but rather if you really follow Chinese politics very, very closely, you will get a lot of information. You cannot be 100% correct, but largely you can foresee some of the leadership lineup. Now, also my book. This is a book published almost 5 years ago. It's a long book, 500 pages, 84 tables and the charts, 800 footnotes, and 200 Chinese terms And also there's an index, 600 Chinese leaders is in the index. Now, I mentioned this because this book provided my methodology. How could I find that, made this kind of prediction, and also definition of fractions and various terms, and also detailed sources. These are all can be found in this book published 5 years ago. Now, of course, that I also follow very quickly about some of the norms and rules that even apply to the 19th Party Congress before Xi Jinping's decision to abolish the term limits. So these are the norms and rules, started by Deng Xiaoping in the later years of Deng Xiaoping, very much implemented in both Jiang Zemin era and the Hu Jintao era. One is the age limits, which means that for the 19th Party Congress, those born before 1950 were disqualified from membership on the 19th Party Congress. There's no exception. Wang Jisan was born 1948, so he could not be Central Committee. So eventually he ended up as vice president of PRC without Central Committee membership. Now, also that, so really it's applied also for the previous two Party Congress. For example, for the 18th Party Congress, the year was 1940. Then for the later the Party Congress, I believe that if we follow that line, in the 20th Party Congress will be anyone born 1955 as the cutting age. But this will not stand because, as we know, Xi Jinping will be for sure stay on that he was born 1953. Now, the interesting question is how many exceptions will be? And currently, we still, Chinese leadership change in the next level, provincial level, I will mention, so still follow that. So that's very, very important indication. But also term limits, I think that also largely apply, or mostly 99% apply in terms of no more than two 5-year terms in the same position, and the 3 5-year terms at the same level and of the leadership. So actually now also will be exception that Xi Jinping will start his 3rd term in the party because he already got the kind of authorization that he could be the chairman of the president of PRC for the 3rd term. So that also will be changed, but how much change? But currently, if you look at provincial leaders, municipal leaders, and military leaders, they all follow that, the current 400, 500, I closely monitor. And most of them actually is only in their 1st term. And no one, violated that one, except maybe 1 or 2 minority leaders in the provinces. So other 500 leaders all follow that. There's also the regional bureaucratic representation. During the Party Congress, before the Party Congress actually, and during, that each province has 2 full membership seats, with the exception of Xinjiang and Tibet. They can have 3 or 4 seats. Now, of course, after the Party Congress, these leaders will be reshuffling. They could be changed, could be 3, or could be 1, or could be 0. But during and just a few months or half year before the Party Congress, each province can only present 2 seats. And the military also had the same number. If we look at the past few Party Congress, 66, including 41 full members, 25 alternates. So this kind of norm and routines is largely implemented. Now, party also has a limited elections, particularly from the delegates elected for Central Committee members, 4 members and the alternates. So 8% of alternates eliminated, and about 10% of the 4 members eliminated. Actually, those eliminated include Minister of the Water Resources, Cheng Li, President of the CAS, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Wang Weiguang, and the Commander of Beijing Military Region, later changed to the Commander of the Northern Theater Commander, Song Fuxuan. So that's actually quite prominent people, but they were defeated because the limited election, so-called more candidates. Now, this is the age pie of the current 376 members, including 4 members that are alternate. As I said, no exception, all born after 1950. A majority of them were born in the 1950s and 1960s. Only 2 members, 1%, were born in 1970s. So the age plays such an important role in that pie, in that Chinese leadership composition. And also that I just finished a study, this is also based on my previous study, look at the provincial chief, namely provincial party secretaries, also like the top 4 cities, Beijing, Shanghai, Tianjin, Chongqing, municipal party secretaries, and the governors and these cities' mayors, altogether 62 people. These are very, very important leadership. But you look at 2021, I mean, I actually just had the number. It's quite astonishing. 17 out of 27 governors, provincial governors, about 63% were appointed this year. So their average tenure is only less than a year. And party secretary a little bit longer, but still just 1 year and 6. So it's a very quick reshuffling. So you can expect almost all of these people, with except a couple of them probably will be defeated in the election. Most of them will be the Central Committee. So it's the new blood in the next Central Committee. Now, this is the last party Congress. Yellow color are the new members. Blue color are the returning members. You look at these 6 very important leadership bodies. This is based on my database. Most of them are new members. The Central Committee, 73%. The Central Disciplinary Inspection Commission, 93%. The 7 members of Secretary, all of them are, did not serve in the previous one. And also the Power Bureau, 60%. Power Bureau Standing Committee, 5 out of 7. The military is a little bit less, only 43%. But if you look at these are the military, it's really the top 7 people, the chairman, vice chairman, and the members of Central Military Commission. But if you look at the military members in the Central Committee, 100% out of the members are first timers. The 4 members, and also including some of them, 6 of them, a few of them promoted by previous party alternates, 85%. So altogether, it's 91% of military members. These are the most senior military officers are first timers. This is even more so than during the Cultural Revolution, like Ling Biao incident and etc. The reshuffling. It's very, very big. Most of them are the young guards, of Xi Jinping directly promoted. Now, of course, all these things, some will continue, some will change because the norm and the rule, some of them already ended or changed during the Xi Jinping era over the past 9 years. Certainly, the 2018, the decision to abolish presidential term limits will have effects on both the terms of the party leadership and also the age requirements, as I mentioned earlier. Now, also previously, they maintained some fractional balance or coalition balance, but this also already changed in the 18 and the 19 party Congress. That explains Xi Jinping's consolidation power. I think that the next one also will be dominated by Xi Jinping's proteges. But also previously, we have the Chinese political system had the so-called succession norm, and someone called the grandpa decision to, like Deng Xiaoping promoted Hu Jintao and Jiang Zemin promoted Xi Jinping, very much like a grandpa, let them to serve as the Power Bureau Standing Committee for 5 years or 10 years as a kind of a successor in training. Since last party Congress 19, we did not see any indication for successor for the next generation, so the so-called 6th generation. So we don't see that norm will continue. And also previously, especially under Hu Jintao, General Secretary is considered as the first among equals. In Hu Jintao's term, Banzhang, like monitor. But now that term is job. Xi Jinping certainly is way above the other 6 members of the Power Bureau Standing Committee. And also these 6 members of the Standing Committee need to have an annual debriefing report. And Xi Jinping will comment on their performance. So the relationship profoundly changed over the past few years. Now, this is I mentioned about the factional balance or coalition balance. It's not like before. And I do not want to go too earlier because you can look at the 10 years ago, it's a different picture, right? But 18th Party Congress, 19th Party Congress all change. And you look at that Xi Jinping's protege. This is only part of them, not the whole, in the Power Bureau Standing Committee and Power Bureau, largely based on his strong ties in the local, the service in these localities. Now, I do not want to go details. Now, what can we expect? What do we know or we do not know at this point? So I put the two columns. The left is expected. I think it's almost for sure a third term and a further power consolidation for Xi Jinping. And also it's almost for sure 6th generation leaders will enter the Power Bureau Standing Committee. How many? We do not know. My prediction will somewhere between 3 to 4. And so 6th generation also included anyone born 1959, because this is 1 year difference. Sometimes the Chinese usually use as an exception. And actually the recent provincial leadership changes, a lot of them was born 1969, that become a provincial senior leaders. Now, also, first timers will likely constitute half of the new Power Bureau. These 25 people, half of them, or more than half of them, will be first timers. And also, I believe a few exceptions for age will likely be made for both retirement, the person supposed to retire, but they will get exceptions, stay on, and those should be reappointment because the age, in terms of age is qualified, will not be reappointed. And also, the turnover rate on the Central Committee will remain high, but a little bit lower than the previous Central Committee in the 19th Party Congress. It's really extraordinarily high, but the next one will be a little bit less. Now, the next one is unclear for now. An indication about the possible successor, unlikely, will be identified, but I'm not 100% sure. That's why I put the unclear. And who will be in and out of the Power Bureau Standing Committee? A lot of question mark. Li Keqiang, almost for sure, will not be the third term premier because still term limits, 2 term limits apply for premier. So who will be the next premier? It's a big question. Li Keqiang may stay on as a Power Bureau Standing Committee member. If so, he probably will become chairman of the National People's Congress, but we still do not know whether he will retire or not. Who will be the next PRC vice president? It's almost for sure Wang Jisan will step down. Who will constitute the top team for financial and economic, foreign affairs, and the military? Actually, by the way, these 3 terms, actually 3 teams, as I will share, most of the top people already up to age. They supposed to retire, but again, 1 or 2 could be exception to stay on. Who will be the female and ethnic minority members of the Power Bureau? I mean, we heard that actually the recent announcement that they will talk about promote more female and ethnic minority, but look at my data pool, not so many candidates in this regard. Right now, in terms of Central Committee, my prediction is will be somewhere between 65 to 68% will be new members. So will be still very high, but it will be a little bit low than the last one. Now, also, I do need to mention these figures, these numbers, including those from alternate promoted to 4 members, also consider them as new. But if we, like my friend Joe Phil-Smith always said that we should delete those from the alternate member to 4 member. Now he has a good point, but if we do so, still will be just a 10% or 12, between 10 to 12% less. So still significant. If not be 75%, still will be 63%. If we not this time, will not be 68%, will be probably 65% also, or 55% also. So it's still very significant, a very high leadership turnover. Now, why I could say that? Because my database already show 46% of them, 173, the current Central Committee member, 19 Central Committee members, already retired to less important position, to the symbolic position, ceremonial position. 46%. 4 of them die, 2 of them purge. So this is already, about 48%. So you plus those who still do not know, and some of them will be also will retire. So that's where I got my number. So these are not just a guess. A lot of data supporting that. Now, interesting things, the current 7 members of the Power Bill Standing Committee, you ask me who will stay, who will retire? Of course, one person for sure will stay, it's Xi Jinping. I actually say only one person will for sure retire, will be current number 3 person, Li Zhansu. But also interestingly, he could succeed Wang Qishan, become the vice chairman of the PRC. Other 5, to be honest, I don't know. I don't think at this point anyone knows. And of course, Zhao Leji may be more likely because this is younger, but still do not know. My view is 3 or maybe even more of them will retire. But the question is, we just do not know who. That's the challenge. Now, who will be the next premier? I put 4 top candidates. Han Zheng and Liu He, both are current vice premier. Han Zheng is executive vice premier. In terms of age, they are, not born 1955 or younger. But I think for the continuity of the financial economic stability and the continuity and stability for both domestic, reason and for international reason, I think that one of them probably will stay on. Again, this is a guess. But at the same time, 2 other leading candidates from younger generation, Li Qiang and Fu Chunhua. Fu Chunhua currently already vice premier. The only vice premier is born in 1960s, or someone else, surprise. So these are the top candidates. It's very interesting to see who will be, right? Now, but just the last Liang Hui in March, they did a very interesting decision to allow the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress to appoint in their quarterly meeting or bi-monthly meeting, appoint someone to be vice premier. You do not need to go to the every March. So this is certainly good news for some of the people who currently not the vice premier, may be promoted as vice premier for a few months, then become premier, because previous norms is all the premiers previously served as vice premier, except Zhou Enlai, the first premier. Now, this is what I mentioned earlier, the 3 important teams. You look at their age. They are all born before 1955, except Li Keqiang has to step down because term limits. So my view is probably 1 or 2 of them will be exception, probably 1. But if that's the case, it will be financial economic team. And I think all top 3 military officers will retire. There are a lot of people already lined up to succeed them. Now, also the challenge, as we know, there's some incidents in the past couple of years. It's quite astonishing. This is a political season. Chinese said the 多事之秋. There are some of the events, purges or arrests related with elite politics, infighting. That's not a secret. Now, of course, I do not want to say that it will be like 10 years ago. 10 years ago is different in unique period. You heard Bo Xilai, Lin Jihua, Zhou Yongkang, many others. I don't think we are going to see that level. But maybe 5 years ago, the purge of Sun Zhencai, it's still very recent. But that's far less scale compared with 10 years ago. Now, these are the incidents, certainly not even in the Sun Zhencai level, but quite interesting because some of them are well connected, including the arrest of Ren Ziqiang, a prominent Princeton critic, arrested in March last year. Then 2 Shanghai gang members on the right column. One is the Vice Minister of Public Security, a domestic career from Shanghai, Sun Lijun. The other is former Shanghai mayor and the police chief, Gong Daoan. Both are members of Shanghai gang, arrested. Then also you look at the bottom, the 2 very important, well-connected figures are recently arrested. One is Dong Hong, and previously is a senior official in the anti-corruption establishment. The other is Chen Dong, powerful chairman of the Hainan Airlines group, also arrested. There are a lot of peculiar things happening regarding Hainan Airline. So these are the things we should keep eyes on it. But I do not want to exaggerate to say everything will be, will be leading towards the major crisis. But we still need to monitor all this development. Could be related with elite politics. But my view is probably most of these cases deal already made before they are arrested or purged. Now, the next one is Xi Jinping campaign and the change. Now, Xi Jinping, especially from Chinese perspective, did a lot of things over the past 9 to 10 years. He launched a bold, big, and broad anti-corruption campaign, purges 440 senior leaders, vice provincial and vice minister level or army level, Junji level or above, including about 80 major generals or above. A lot of generals. So Chinese joke is the Civil War only lost 2 generals, but this is China's in late 40s. I mean, or anti-Japanese war, someone said. But now 80 major generals. I mean, a lot of them actually the lieutenant and 4 generals purged. 42 members of the 18th Central Committee purged. And relatively speaking, 19-party Congress is better. Only 2 members purged. Xi Jinping also launched a large-scale military reform, really had a profound change Chinese military. 3 things, moving away from the Russian model to the American model with joint operation, emphasis on Navy and Air Force, control of the commander system directly, not by 2 levels, by all the departments, and also promote the young guards. And also cohesive campaigns against Taiwan, certainly got a lot of international attention. Chinese nationalism is on the rise. Strong poverty elimination, or alleviation actually should be elimination campaign. It's quite impressive. And draconian measures, certainly it's a controversial international domain. Even domestically, there's some concern to control COVID-19 spread, but so far it's effective in the country. And the Green Development Campaign, just to give you mention example, 2008, before Xi Jinping became top leader, 16 most polluted cities in the world located in China. But 10 years later, 2018, the number of Chinese most polluted cities in this 20 reduced to 2. Instead, 15 most polluted cities located in India. So Xi Jinping wants to get credit for that. And finally, it's a new proactive foreign policy, certainly very controversial in the international domain, but domestically, people applaud Belt Road Initiative, AIIB, and China's global partner network, various forms. Now, in terms of anti-corruption campaign, it's really remarkable. These top 5 people, including Power Standing Committee in the security, 4 senior officers. I mean, the most senior officers, including 2 vice chairmen of CMC, all purged, including the person in charge of the military operation, in charge of personnel or propaganda, purged. So that's how strong, how bold, could be. Now, into poverty elimination, of course, Xi Jinping did not start that. Deng Xiaoping and Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao all contributed to that. But look at the past 9 years under Xi Jinping's watch, it's drastic increase of the budget. So certainly he want to claim that he completed the most difficult part into poverty elimination, want to position himself as the man of the people. These photos certainly also show this kind of populist approach, moving away from the princely image, particularly his recent call for common prosperity. Now, let me also mention, if for some of the previous factions I will mention also further in a couple of minutes, is replaced. What are Xi Jinping's power bases? Previously, he based on princely, so-called the red nobility, but not anymore. I mean, actually, he changed that even a few years ago, or maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So his proteges and confidence are now largely the provincial leadership from his colleagues, associates from Hebei, Fujian, Zhejiang, and Shanghai, especially from Zhejiang. I'm going to back to that topic. Also the so-called Shanxi gang, because as we know that his father advanced his career from Shanxi, his family He also spent 6 or 7 years as a set-down youth. He has some fellow colleagues, he met at that time, including Wang Qishan, including Wang Cheng. Currently, Wang Cheng is a Politburo member. So this is Xi Jinping's power base. And also military, as we know, Xi Jinping served as a Misu himself for DOD Secretary, China's Defense Minister, for 2 or 3 years. So he met some of the senior officers and developed a long-term relation. But more importantly, he promoted a lot of young guards, newly promoted, as I mentioned earlier. The other is he has a lot of Misu himself, 办公室主任, the office, general office, office director, chief of staff, and his personal Misu. I don't want to go detail, a lot of them, and etc. These are his power base. Now, the previous major factions like princelings significantly reduced. You see from 18th Party Congress, 9 of them, to the last Party Congress, only 4. And I predict the next Party Congress, in a year, probably only 2. Of course, Xi Jinping's for sure. Whether Xiaojie will enter the power bureau, I do not know. And so that's the princeling, 太子党 reduced significantly. But even Tuan Pai, his rival, Hu Jintao's protege, also significantly reduced from the power bureau 18th 6 to 3. Now I predict probably only 1 or maybe 2 if Wang Yang stay on. So that's the situation, right? And so these are 2 powerful factions now really significantly weakened. Now this is interesting. The chart. This is an example of the 62 provincial chiefs, 62 very prominent leaders. You can see under Hu Jintao, his protege Tuan Pai increased, and they reached the peak, a year after he retired, because there's a time lag on. But then under Xi Jinping, they are quickly dropped. A lot of purges are the Tuan Pai leaders. So at now, only 1%, 1.6%. So this is talk about Xi Jinping's consolidating power, the change of factional dynamics in China. Now, let me move to the last topic, the rising stars, clusters, and the characteristics. I think probably the most interesting part for many China watchers. These are the leaders I predict will be very, very important. The top 4 will be the strongest candidates for the next Power Bureau Standing Committee, whether it be 7 or 9. And chances for 3 or all of them get the seats is pretty high. The next level is the 9 leaders I identify. I wish I had more space. I can a couple more. And these will be the leading candidates for, the 13 or 12 seats vacant, maybe even 14 or 15 seats. We do not know yet in the Power Bureau, right? This including Yuan Jiajun, I'm going to talk just a few minutes. Guangdong Governor Ma Xingrui, and Beijing Mayor Cheng Jining. I also will elaborate on him. Shanghai Mayor Gong Zhen, and Liaoning Party Secretary Zhang Guoqing, and Hunan Party Secretary Zhang Qingwei, and only woman candidate from my database, Chen Yiqing, and Guizhou Party Secretary, and Li Shulei, who was really the brand, one of the advisors for Xi Jinping, advanced his career from the Central Party School, and also another person is Zhang Jingquan. He actually made all the documents of the preparation for the Central for the next Party Congress, and he is the previous deputy of Wang Funing, but highly likely he will enter the Power Bureau, at least for the secretary. And he's currently already director of a policy research center, research office, the position Wang Funing used to hold. Now, let me very quickly mention several major fault lines at the next Party Congress. I believe the post of a provincial party secretary is still a major stepping stone for the national leadership, but provincial leadership experience is less predominant. Some of them just serve very quickly for 2 or 3 years from the other areas, then move up. Not like previously, those people spend the entire life before move to center, serve as the local leaders in the county, in the municipal, prefectural, and provincial. And but that it was changed. And those leaders primarily advanced their early careers in SOEs, state-owned enterprises, especially in the aerospace industry, and also university administrations and the government think tank will constitute distinctive clusters, the new elite groups. Some of them have briefly served as the top provincial leaders, but that's only just more like a symbolic for 2 or 3 years, more or less. And also, the major faction competition will likely occur among Xi Jinping's proteges, notably within the powerful Zhejiang gang. There's so many people from Zhejiang will advance, but still the seats is limited. So internal infighting between Zhejiang leaders, Xi Jinping's proteges, will be interesting phenomenon to look. And finally, leaders with Shanghai backgrounds, especially those who establish strong ties with Xi Jinping, will likely take many important positions. Now, Xi Jinping is not a Shanghai gang member, although he spent 8 months before he moved to the Beijing to be the vice chairman and the successor designate in Shanghai. But during these 8 months, he developed a lot of very strong ties with Shanghai leaders. And also, 2 previous Shanghai gang leaders, Jiang Zemin and Zheng Qinghong, really play important role to promote Xi Jinping, endorse Xi Jinping. So the relationship is very interesting. But of course, Xi Jinping at the same time, do not want to let Shanghai gang continue to expand. So he wanted his own people combined with some of the Shanghai gang people. So change the nature of Shanghai political leaders. But it's interesting development, how that will unfold. Now, let me mention very quickly, I only have a few more minutes. This is the charts I made. I think that reflect that the provincial chief position, provincial party secretary and the governors are stepping stone. About 3/4 of the Power Bureau members, particularly in the 17 and the 18 party Congress, previously served as Power Bureau members serve as a provincial chief. But the last party Congress still see some reduce. I think it will be further reduced this time. And now let me mention only 3 rising stars. I think their experience could be exemplary. One is from the aerospace industry, one is from university, the other is from think tank. As I mentioned, these are the 3 clusters will be very, very important. And of course, there's some of the party ideologues also will remain. Some, I do not want to get the impression all of them like them, but these are 2 people, 3 groups are very, very prominent. I think you will see some of them will advance. And one is, I will not be surprised in 5 years, 6 years, one of them will become premier of China. And now, Yuan Jiajun, he advanced his career. He studied, aerospace, aviation. You can see, look at his school background in Beihang. And then also he was a visiting scholar in Germany for a year. He really played a leadership role in aerospace. He is a commander-in-chief or deputy commander-in-chief in like the Shenzhou Yihao spacecraft system, and then China's manned space engineering program, China's lunar exploration projects. These are real aerospace projects. He served as the top leaders. But then after that, he moved to the provincial leadership, and of course, also served as some of the very important companies for a while, corporations and research institute. Then become vice governor of Ningxia very briefly. Then executive vice governor of Zhejiang and the governor of Zhejiang. Now he is a party secretary of Zhejiang. Now, the next one is Beijing mayor, also from Dongbei. He studied, got his undergraduate and graduate from Tsinghua, then went to London to study in the Imperial College and got his PhD in environmental system analysis. He actually spent altogether 10 years in London. And also after that, he returned to Tsinghua, served as department chair, vice chairman chair, and president, vice president, then moved on to be the Minister of Environment Protection and currently mayor of Beijing. So he is a very perfect person to deal with the climate change issues in China. So he probably will further get the promotion. The last person is Ying Li. He is currently Fujian Party Secretary. His educational background is largely in the medicine, and also got his MD and in Shandong Medical School, and then also PhD in Russia in terms of public health. And also served as a visiting scholar at Harvard. I think it's not in the Kennedy Center or not in the Fairbank or Asia Center. I think it's in the Public Health Research Institute. I mean, what they call, I do not know. I forgot. But also, this is for a year, so it's not that's unfamiliar with Harvard. He served as vice chairman of the executive committee of WHO. And then he advanced early career, really in the think tank environment, like particularly think tank under the State Council for 10 years, if not longer. Then also move on to be an officer in the public health and ministry, and including the director of state food and drug safety. So he is expert in this area. He served as governor of Sichuan, and then now provincial party secretary of Fujian, very important provincial leadership. So he is also on the rise. So all these three people represent different clusters. Finally, this is one of the last charts or the picture I want to show about the Shanghai born leaders or leaders with Shanghai experience. Look at the history. They always play very, very important role. But my prediction is next party Congress, you will see even stronger. If it's 9 members, will be 5. If it's 7, probably 3, And so that's prediction. You look at this, Xi Jinping for sure, Han Zheng I mentioned could be possibility, and Ding Xuexiang, Li Qiang, and Li Xi also served as the deputy party secretary, organizing department head in Shanghai for many years, and currently Guangdong party secretary. So these are the importance of Shanghai. And actually, my book, this mentioned about the middle class Shanghai. There's one chapter, a long chapter about the Shanghai leadership, their characteristics, their style, how they differ from other regions. And also I'm working on another book, Xi Jinping's protege, Rising Elite Group in the Chinese leadership. We'll elaborate these 3 groups and more in this forthcoming book. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Toby, I should already very long. Liz, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much for a really informative, very, very rich talk and very lively talk, Cheng. Let me lead off with a question or 2 of my own, and then we already have a number that have come through the Q&A that I'll try to get to as well. So let me ask you a question of kind of how you assess the caliber and strength of this emerging set of leaders that you talked about. At the end, these look like very impressive individuals, PhDs from London and elsewhere, times that they spent at Harvard University and the like, people who have strong careers in aerospace, think tanks, universities, people who come from Shanghai cosmopolitan connections, people who've served in Zhejiang, another really progressive area. And I think about that, and I don't know if you've had a chance to read the forthcoming book by Victor Shi. It's due out in April, and Victor entitles his book Coalitions of the Weak. And it's a fascinating book in which he looks at the way in which Mao, after the Great Leap Forward, developed what he calls a coalition of a lot of other weak leaders to surround him, because Mao felt actually quite insecure about his own status at that time, and so wanted to have other leaders in the Politburo and the Standing Committee who were compromised in some way, or who didn't have independent political networks, and therefore he could really control. And Victor in his book suggests that Xi also has been developing a coalition of the weak. as what he presumes is a kind of expression of Xi's own sense of insecurity vis-a-vis the elite. On the one hand, we've seen this really impressive purge of the military and other sectors, the anti-corruption drive that's gotten rid of many of the pre-existing factions and so forth. But according to Victor's analysis, then the leaders who've been promoted have very weak political networks. So they may look really impressive in terms of educational credentials or other kinds of aspects of their resume, but in terms of politics, they're not in a position to challenge the leader. And Victor argues that that buys short-term security for the leader, especially as the leader is aging and becomes less secure about their own power and more concerned about the possibility of younger potential challengers rising up. But he believes that it's also a fundamental vulnerability for the system, that if a leader starts doing that and surrounds himself with a coalition of the weak, that he's opening the door in the future to the top leadership not really being able to effectively deal with major policy challenges. And so he sees that as, doesn't give the exact time frame, and it would clearly depend on various kinds of crises, either domestic or international. But I would be interested in your thoughts about that, whether you see Xi as building this coalition of the weak, whether you see these folks from Shanghai, Zhejiang with these impressive academic credentials as a kind of coalition of competence and strength, or one that has a certain kind of vulnerability that ultimately may create some real problems.
Okay, this is certainly, it's an excellent question. I haven't read Victor's work, but I'm going to read that book. This is certainly a varied point. I still disagree that kind of analysis, but I wanted to mention that there's a sheer concern, even within China. Some people said that those leaders who did not have strong provincial experience, they may not be tough enough to deal with some of the challenges. Those from the grassroots, it's really a struggle to the top. But the three leaders mentioned, it's from elsewhere. But here I want to make 3 points. First of all, I mentioned these three examples. As I said, these are examples, the three groups are mentioned, but my book actually will mention other groups, including remaining groups, including people have a different background, have no foreign education, no foreign experience. It's work in the ideology sector, look at something. So these two, their relationship is interesting. But one point I want to mention, Xi Jinping, at least at the moment, still rely on, at least partially, maybe also significantly, from people like Liu He, who got a PhD, got MPA from Harvard, and also the forthcoming people like the three leaders I mentioned. Now, this is number two. Number three, those from the technical or technocratic or science background, they may not necessarily weak. Just to give you background, those from company, I mean, Li Peng actually advanced his career from not so much early on in the provincial things. And Zhu Rongji is also technocrat. And both of them are tough in different ways. And besides, we should not forget that Xi Jinping was considered as a weak leader before he became the number one. We do not know. Again, their personality is very, very important. It's very difficult to generalization. Those got high education, PhD, may not be tough enough to deal with challenges. And also, we really do not know that whether at the moment they consider as relatively not as strong, but things could change very quickly, right? They need to be tested. They will be tested, or some people keep a low profile. This exactly happened to Xi Jinping early on. But some of the things we, follow actually show their kind of educational caliber and also some other kind of skills. But at one point, I think at least you agree, the important is the diversity of the background, the experience, not just the monolithic kind of career path. It's very, very important. So in that, I think 3 new groups contribute to the process. Now, Princeton has its strengths, Tuanpai has its strengths, but they also have the weaknesses. But my point is, China entered a new kind of phase of the elite politics. Some of them still there, some of them reduce their significance, but we do need to look at the future trajectory, the pattern, the composition. So my discussion, it's not entirely say that the view by Victor, and also I think it's a good point, excellent point, but I just want to buy, it's far too early to have the generalization to say that definitely weak. Xi Jinping only promote weak leaders, and but again, you cannot. Xi Jinping certainly does not like kingmakers like Liu Yuan, in the military, Liu Shaoqi's son. He certainly sometimes, but on the other hand, we should not forget in his first term, he used Wang Jisan. They play a very, very important role. Wang Jisan is a very strong leader, right?
That's true.
So that's my answer to your excellent question.
Although Victor argues that Xi could have kept Wang on the standing committee despite the age limit, but didn't do so, in part because he didn't want such a charismatic so, one can argue this, I guess, in both directions. But let me turn to, since you talked about the importance of diversity and composition of this, several of the members of the audience could not help but be struck with the virtually all-male lineup, certainly all-male in the past, and only one, provincial party secretary of Guizhou, is it?
Yes, Guizhou. Cheng Ying.
Yeah. And so several of the questions asked about the lack of both women and ethnic minorities in the top leadership, and whether this is a problem for the party, how the party explains this, and whether ordinary people see this as a kind of problem or a weakness of the party.
Well, I see it's a problem. It's still, I do not have sufficient information to know how the public see that, whether it's a problem or not. I certainly work in the elite study for a long time. I believe that's a problem. I think diversity is important. And now, so you see that my book document, in the different levels on female representation and etc. But I also need to mention to emphasize gender balance is still relatively thin, even in Western democracies. And 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it's a different picture. In some of the cooperations in corporate America, it's still not balanced at all. Right? And so if we, democracy, Western countries also face some challenges, and only the achievements made in recent years. So sometimes we may need to put in that perspective. Now, there's some welcome development on the minority issues. I certainly hope there will be minority 1 or 2 enter the power bureau. But the candidates, actually, I have also have a written on that subject. I'm going to write more on that subject. But they are, at the moment, the pool is not strong because you do need to prepare them. But the good thing is, even in these 5 minority regions, there's a law indicate the governor or chairman of the government side should be minority. The party secretary, number 1 person, usually is Han, or almost all Han. But the number 2 person is a minority. So that's already become part of the law implemented. I think, for example, that they just appointed another Tibetan, although he has a Chinese-like name, but it's Tibetan, and to be the chairman, just like a governor. The same things with Xinjiang. It's a relatively young member. Also in the prefecture level and lower, it's the same thing. This is a Chinese law adopted a couple of decades ago. Now, for women, certainly it's not so encouraging. This in China's history is that no woman ever served on the Power Bureau Standing Committee. Previously, there are two. I mean, it's not the last party, not current one, but the last one. There are two females in the Power Bureau, but not only one. Right? I think this time probably it's also just a one. But the encouraging thing is because Chinese leadership recruitment heavily emphasized on your educational background. But the educational trajectory show actually women constitute more in terms of undergraduate, and also women constitute like a MA degrees. Probably it's very close to half. 38% of PhDs are women. So I think this is encouraging development. As time goes on, there will be more demand, the bigger pool to select talented women. I hope that will be fixed in the future, but I think it's a problem. I'm not too optimistic for this party Congress. I certainly distracted that the last party Congress, the Power Bureau, is even no minority member. I mean, the current one. So let's see, because when the preparation document they just announced that they will put emphasis on women and minority. Let's see whether there's a lip service or there's a real effort to make that happen.
Let me ask you about another kind of diversity also that several members of the audience raised, and that is diversity of views, policy differences. Do you think there is still room for debate on issues in the Standing Committee of the Politburo, or has Xi Jinping's success at stamping out potentially rival factions also had a kind of deadening effect on the ability of people to raise alternative views and for there to be any kind of robust discussion at the highest levels?
Well, this is an excellent question. At the surface, you do not see any debate. And but previously, even before Xi Jinping, the factional check and balance, it's not illegal, not completely clear, transparent at all. But on the other hand, you ask a taxi driver, they will tell you which leader which faction. And usually those who from the inland region have the more policy leaning towards inland region, those from coastal region leaning towards policy for coastal region. Shanghai, you see Cheng, the former party secretary, challenged Xi Jinping, Hu Jintao, Wen Jiabao's macroeconomic policy and etc. You do still see the debate about the property, how serious that the issue, even now. So it's subtle. You should read about between line. So it's a lack of transparency, but it will be self-deceiving for us overseas observers to think that Chinese leadership is a monolithic group with the same ideas, same background, same views, same policy reference. Preferences. No, they are not. I mean, there's this tremendous indication show there are a lot of differences. Now, what is remarkable things is by Xi Jinping, sometimes he comes from Princeton background, but he's tried to surprise others by moving away from Princeton to present him as a man of the people by anti-corruption, by many other things. Now, this is also true that we do need to be flexible to see, but that change itself reflects tremendous pressure on Chinese societal force. Because Chinese leaders, including Wang Qishan, including other senior leaders, mentioned China has public opinion too. We should not forget when February 2020, when Dr. Li Wenliang whistleblower, the case, there's a real crisis, real challenge. But that's a long time ago. Why? So you do need to respond. Again, it is just self-deceiving. They say these are all the same. They're only just a yes man follow the policies. Of course, at the moment, there's a very strong tight control. There's no question there's a personality cut. But the backlash is also there. Again, these are the well-informed people. And relatively speaking, many of them are very capable people. They know what we are talking about. And also I mentioned, even within the Zhejiang gang, they have a lot of different things. At the moment, maybe it's more for power, but also power will link to policies, link to social group, interest groups. Particularly, it's noticeable that the people like Yuan Jiajun I just mentioned, he mentioned common prosperity. The key word is prosperity. It's not anti-private sector. But you also see some other leaders just to be very cynical about this private sector. They emphasize on equality. So that's the interesting, difference. We do have, reasonably good information to show their differences, some tensions. Over to you. Yeah.
Okay. Also, you mentioned the large number of very prominent people who have been purged or attacked during the anti-corruption campaign, and leaving the question of what influence this really has on the elite. And a question that also came up in the Q&A was whether the recent accusations by Peng Shuai, the tennis star, against Zhang Gaoli, a former member of the Politburo, whether that has any chance, do you think, of also affecting the image or the standing of the political elite in the popular opinion?
Sure, I will happy answer the second question, but the first question I just missed it. I just saw just a fun question to me. So could you repeat the first question? The first question.
The question about Peng Shuai.
No, I know that question, but the first question, the early one, you said that you had two questions, right? When is Peng Shuai?
My own earlier questions. My own earlier question was actually going to be about Gong Tong Fu Yu, and you answered it. Really, it was going to be kind of about what it really means, what common prosperity really means, and whether there are different interpretations. Along what lines you think it developed. So you've actually gotten to that. And I have a number of others too, but I'll say them.
So let me quickly answer Peng Shuai's question. This is an important question. Actually, I was approached by many people, journalists, for that one, but I actually declined because I do not have enough information what's going on. So I do not want to spread rumor. Financial Times still quote me because I was the person who wrote the profile of Zhang Gaoli, or bios of Zhang Gaoli in Wikipedia. That's why the reason that's why they always approach me. Now, there's no question for me. Zhang Gaoli advanced career from his strong ties with some of the people like Zheng Qinghong, like Jiang Zemin. So he is a part of, Jiang Zemin, Zheng Qinghong's coalition. Also, he advanced from the Shenzhen and etc. later Tianjin. This you can see the trajectory. So whether this is related with someone wanted to use that case for factional reason, again, I do not have sufficient information to answer that question. It's possible, but the things is that particularly why this her Twitter lasted for at least 30 minutes, because the Chinese machine reading things can crack down very quickly, but even that the story also spread not crack down for a few days. That give you some kind of indication, maybe related with the factional politics, but on the other hand, the Chinese interpretation, this is Western anti-China forces use that case to try to boycott, mobilize sources to, boycott the Olympics. So at least the current discourse in China is centered around that narrative. But that narrative will play very, very important role. Even someone wanted to play the politics, elite politics, will not continue to play around that. So that's actually interesting to see this kind of foreign interpretation actually have the impact and the trajectory or discourse or narrative in China. It's fascinating to see that kind of dynamics. So again, it's possible, but I do not have sufficient information even, but I just say it is true based on my early study of Zhang Gaoli. He is a part of that faction or coalition.
I think we're almost at time, so I'm just going to ask you one final question that a couple of the members of our audience raised, and that is whether you think Xi Jinping will be known as chairman of the Communist Party in the future, or will he continue to be primarily known as the general secretary of the party?
Well, I do not see an initiative for the next year's party congress for change the title from general secretary to chairman, unless there will be surprise move. So I do not want to count on that. I just more the outside speculation. I cannot predict 6 years ago, 6 years later, who knows? But I think there's no incentive at this point to change that title, and there's no narrative from Chinese official documents to do so. And so I'm not convinced that will be the move.
And since he's already chair of state, and he's already Xi Zhuxi, does he need to be a double Zhuxi?
Because you open some things with so much, capital to spend on that unnecessary things, and also look at China's history. Bill knows. I great to see him on the screen that the Mao Zedong wanted to, use that to change with chairman. This is lead to the serious problem with Lin Biao, certainly that the term. I mean, this Chinese will immediately sense that. So what's the point? I don't see the rationale. I could be wrong, but at this point, at least from the Chinese document, Chinese narrative, I follow very, very closely, do not see there's any indication.
And so far, Cheng, you have a much better track record in predicting elite changes in China than most of us have in predicting American-U.S. elections. So congratulations on your track record to date, and we'll all be holding up your predictions against the lineup at the 20th Party Congress. And I thank you very much for a really informative and very fascinating discussion today.
Thank you so much, Liz, and thank you for all the excellent questions. Thank you for Bill and Winnie.
Great. And thank you for your gracious comments at the beginning about the Fairbanks Center for Chinese Studies. I think all of us at the Fairbanks Center are very grateful for that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks to everyone for listening.
Bye. Hi, Bill. Great to see you. I hope it's okay.